welcome back to the Cover 3 podcast here on CBS Sports. That's Tom Fornelli, that's Bud Elliott, that's Danny Cannell. I'm Chip Patterson, coming to you live at youtube.com/cover3 and everywhere you get your podcasts on demand. Thanks for hanging out. Smash that subscribe, smash that like, and come and join us in the chat, a.k.a. the Cover 3 Tailgate. We are already rocking and rolling even across the pond. We got a friend from the Tailgate from the United Kingdom has a question that I would like to present to the group in just a little bit. We've got more questions from the Tailgate. Isaac has shown up after getting absolutely torched when we discussed Iowa State on Wednesday. We appreciate you coming back, number one Cyclone fan. We've also got questions on Texas and Oklahoma's quarterback room and more from the big old bag of mail. But we begin with, I think, a little bit of time to dig in on the proposal from CST, not the time zone. Bud, where are you going? He is recusing himself. So
Bud doesn't want to talk about it. He's like, screw this, I'm out.
CST stands for College Sports Tomorrow. College Sports Tomorrow is a 20-person working group that does include the university presidents or chancellors at Syracuse. It includes the chancellor at Syracuse, the university president at West Virginia. Okay, like those seem like important people. It's got one of the top lieutenants under Roger Goodell in the NFL office, somebody who helped negotiate a $110 billion television deal. Okay, now you're swinging a big sword. Now we're talking about somebody, the group, the person who's leading the group, comes from the search firm world. We know they've got connections across college sports, and here's what they have. Guys, they think they can save college sports. And this is an incredibly online message board pitch, okay? Here's what they are saying. They say we're going to take the top 70 programs in college football, and you guys are going to be moved up into a permanent top division. You're going to be split up into 7 different 10-team divisions. Then the magical 8th division. Oh, this is where you get your promotion and relegation, because teams that are in the bottom outside of that top 80 will be competing every year to work their way into the top, that other 8th division of promotion and relegation. Then when we get into the actual, college football playoff, or they say they're going to get rid of the college football playoff, that CST, no NCAA, no college football playoff.
No committee.
No committee, because it is just the 8 division winners. So again, the top division has 80 teams. 70 stay up permanently. 10 are going to rotate in and out every single year. 8 division winners into the playoff. The next 8 best records, they are in. Oh, buzzy. You got to go? Okay.
Audio issues, technical issues.
All right. So
Bud has been relegated to the 9th division.
That's right.
So then, you build out a 16-team playoff with your 8 division winners and 8 more at-larges, decided by records and tiebreakers, a lot like the NFL. They say that by creating one body, it helps with, negotiations on things like NIL and transfer portal and salary cap. I mean, Danny, you're fired up. Are you on board with CST? You roll it? You down with CST? Yeah, you know me.
Yeah, I like that. I was trying to think of a catchy name for the CST. I know it's College Sports Tomorrow, but I was trying to think of something like Cash Grab something. I don't know, because it does feel like, I thought it was very interesting that they tried to do it out of the goodness of their hearts. So that's the way they portrayed it. Like they're worried about the health of college athletics and they want to save football, as if there's not a massive pot of gold at the end of this rainbow that they could possibly find themselves on. I'm torn because I love some of the ideas. The chances of this actually coming to fruition are what have me hesitant to getting on board with it, especially anytime soon. I was really excited about the relegation idea until it's not really relegation when the 70 top teams aren't subject to it. So it's kind of like, we got to protect Vanderbilt. Sorry, Barton, I couldn't resist. We got to protect those bottom tier teams, when I think that would be more interesting than a bottom rotation of, 10 teams that are that 70 to 80 group. But I'm kind of curious to see, because on one hand, I'm like, this doesn't feel very real. And then you read the details, and it was one of the reasons the conference commissioners wanted the deadline in place by March 15th, because it felt like they were getting a little bit worried that this could be a real possibility. So what I'm trying to figure out is this an actual thing that could be the solution, or is this something that was leaked now that it's been shot down and we see what we could have had, which happens all the time in our sport?
I'm going to guess the latter.
Yeah, we can analyze. I think there's a interesting discussion analyzing the proposal. I think the outlook part of this, like, do you think it will happen? That when it is made expressly clear in the athletics reporting that Greg Sankey, commissioner of the SEC, Tony Petitti, commissioner of the Big Ten, made it very clear, we have not talked to these guys. We are not rocking and rolling. The ACC heard a presentation in February, but none of the other figures that I would expect to be able to move something forward at the highest levels of college sports appear to want to be associated with this. Now, the reporting also said it's because they don't want to ruffle feathers with their media rights partners. I would understand that, which, Danny, why you said anytime soon, all of these conferences and now the college football playoff have media rights deals that are going to take us through at least the end of the next decade. I mean, you would have to CST, unless deals are going to be rewritten and everything's going to be blown up, then you're not even going to be able to implement this contractually for another 8 years or so. So I think it is interesting to look at their proposal. I think that the outlook for it does not seem likely at this point in the proceedings.
No, and what's interesting is you mentioned there's a search firm that was involved in like putting together this plan that's part of CST or whatever they're calling it. Do you know what that search firm has largely been used for?
Conference commissioners.
Exactly. And the conference commissioners they helped place want absolutely nothing to do with this plan. So that should probably tell you a lot about the viability of this happening anytime soon. I wouldn't be shocked if the future of college football resembles this plan one day. I mean, I talked about it before the show. I wrote something very similar to this 8 years ago, as far as an idea for what college football could do as far as realigning and then promotion and relegation. Of course, mine wasn't cowardly. Everybody was eligible to be promoted and relegated from division to division. And the difference was you had your top division, which is one that actually competed for the national title, whether you wanted to call it the college football playoff or not. And then everybody would drop and fall. And the goal would be to get to the top division to compete for a national title. So parts of this that I like are if they went to the conferences or the divisions or whatever the heck they're calling them, and they made them regional again, I could support that because that's always been important to me. But it does seem bogus to me to put relegation and promotion in there, but only limit it to the very bottom tier. Like that's just, I feel like that they're just throwing that in as like a, hey, and everybody, Bill Connolly wrote that he wants promotion, so we can get him on our side by, putting this in there. It's just, it feels just like a throw in at the end, but it is, you mentioned it. It sounds like a very message board ass kind of guy, just writing a long thing on the board. And everybody's like, you're insane. You should be working or something right now. So yeah. It'll be interesting.
And they seemed to yada yada NIL and transfer portal, and they were like, and we would have one body, and they could
every other sport. They did not mention it all. What happens to basketball? What happens to the Olympic sports? Oh, not our problem.
Yeah,
it's do you think that they were nervous? Do you think that Petitti and Sankey did feel threatened at all from this newcomer, this organization? Because at the same time, as we're saying all this, there's one thing that will make people possibly move, and it's money.
Right.
And I think we could all agree that if there was power in the group, that it could be significantly more than all those billion-dollar deals. Like if you got everyone to come together and have this amazing playoff setup and have this relegation, that even those TV deals could be looked at. I don't know. I just feel like there's always a way out. But do you think Petitti and Sankey were at least man, this is a serious threat? Or do you think they're we're saying oh, this is message board material? Because there's some, like you said, there are serious names in this that do prove that it is valid. And, I thought the one thing was interesting. It said, they're not in this for the money, but they spent a lot of money to do this research, and they wouldn't tell you how much, because I just thought there were some details in there that were very interesting. But do you think there was a threat? Do you think this was something that they paid attention to?
Yeah, there's some outside the box stuff from MLS. They've got a former MLS executive as part of this 20-person board. And one of the lines that I think would make university presidents start to ruffle feathers at the conference level is universities would own a piece of it wouldn't just be your revenue distribution. You would have ownership of CST. So yes, Danny, I do think that there's at least like that angle of like, as much as I'm sitting here and being a little bit flippant, I do understand that within the proposal, there was at least something that would make a reasonable person enticed to hear more. And I think university ownership of the system itself, rather than just being a participant and somebody who receives payment, I think that that would be something that as universities have their own financial concerns about the next 5, 10, 20 years into the future, the idea that you would have a real stake in this is something that, yeah, it could motivate presidents to want to hear more.
That's ultimately what it's going to come down to, because they're trying to save college football or whatever, and they never tell you what they're trying to save it from. Like, oh no, ratings are too high, we're making too much money, we have to save the sport. And they're spending money on this when they're crying that they're poor and we need to change things because of NIL, the transfer portal, and lawsuits. And then they're spending money on this, and they're paying the MLS commissioner, whoever it was, however much they paid him, to tell them something they could have just read if they Googled it. So I don't know. It all sounds very silly to me. And again, I wouldn't be shocked if this is ultimately what this sport becomes. But when this sport does break off into a super league, I don't think it's going to be 80 teams. I think it'll be closer to 40 than 280.
That's what I think. That was, to be honest with you, I think 70 to 80 is too much. I think
it's not too much from the aspect of you do want teams to get their skulls caved in. Like, you need those teams. And if you go to a 40-team league, there are going to be programs that are not accustomed to being like the 2-10 team who suddenly become the 2-10 team. And how happy will they be to accept that role? But going back to what you're saying, if they've got an ownership in what is now essentially a professional sports league, because that's what this proposal ultimately is, it's a professional sports league.
Yep.
Then maybe they're willing to accept that. But then I would guess you'd also see implementations of salary caps and just pretty much NFLization again continued of the sport, which is why I get kind of eye-rolly when I hear it's like, oh, one of Roger Goodell's lieutenants is in there, the MLS guys, and they're trying to make it a professional league. And they're trying to save college football by slowly and systematically taking away everything that makes college football college football.
To their defense, aren't they trying to save college athletics is kind of their excuse? Isn't that what they're saying? Because that was the thing that I do think like that is a real concern. And maybe this is very much company line from the commissioners that I've talked to is, what about women's sports? What about non-revenue sports? I played baseball. What about men's soccer? Like all of those sports. I do think that's where there's this existential crisis that they mentioned in the article. I don't think anybody's worried about football. I do think, and there was a question in the chat, what does this mean for basketball? It means that this is separate. This is the separation that has been put forth by Chip Kelly and others of saying we need to treat football differently because it is. So I do think there is some portion of this that I don't think anybody's worried about college football. I do think a lot of college administrators are very worried about other sports.
Right. And like, I know that, Len Perna of Turnkey ZRG, the search firm that we're referencing here, he's the lead organizer of CST, College Sports Tomorrow. He's a big fan of the Cover 3 podcast, and I know he listens. And so I want to be sure that I'm
in the chat.
I want to be sure that I'm fair to him and his group that has put the time in here. It has, according to The Athletic, college administrators a little bit rattled, right? Was what they kept calling it, the Perna roll-up proposal. As Andrew Marchand, Stu Mandel, as they were doing their reporting, they were hearing from other people like, hey, so like, what's going on with this? Which I think the problem, if we were to say the way that it's framed, when you come at this and say, we are replacing the NCAA, we are replacing the college football playoff. Well, now if I work for a conference with ties to the college football playoff and the NCAA, it's like, okay, so you're basically replacing me. Mm-hmm. It's a very, very difficult thing to be able to find some positive reception towards. Gordon Gee, the West Virginia president, you've got the Syracuse chancellor in there. You've got one of the owners of the Philadelphia 76ers. There are influential people. I just think that the important details from the report, as I read it in The Athletic, were that the individuals and the people that I think can make real change happen in college football haven't yet thrown their support behind it.
You know what this all strikes me as, and I could be way off because this is very, very, very far from my area of expertise, if I'm an expert in anything. There's been mention of like private equity in college football.
Mhm.
This proposal to me is what private equity would do to college football. And I wouldn't be
Oh,
shocked at all if private equity is very much involved in these proposals, because essentially what happens is when money comes in from outside, you start stripping away anything that's not making money. You're just trying to maximize the absolute profits you can get from it to get money back on your investment that you've poured in. So Dan, you mentioned like the Olympic sports and stuff. They don't care. That's
Right.
why it's not mentioned in this. They don't care if it goes away. They don't care if the athletic departments go away and anybody in charge of the conferences, whatever. They just want to streamline everything to make it as efficient and profitable as possible. And that's ultimately what this is all about. How can we squeeze every single damn dime out of this to get our money back? So, yeah, that's what this all strikes me as.
also, I don't know if there's like gobs of money that are not being tapped into.
Mm-mm.
That
Right.
was alluded to in the article, right? Wasn't there, somebody said, I don't know if there is all this money out there that people think there is.
Right. That's given the media. I am not like the good media industry analyst, but just given what I've been able to absorb of the media industry, it does not seem as though there is a lot of money hiding anywhere that is available to go out there and like, even if we rip up all the media rights deals, we group everyone in together, we go to all the major networks the way the NFL did with the guy who negotiated the NFL's last deal. I mean, is it going to lead to 2 times better payouts? I don't.
No, it's going to lead to like a 1.3% increase in your annual revenue.
Which unfortunately for the private equity guys, that probably sounds great.
Yeah, it does.
Well, if we just sustain this for 20 years and then we can sell and get out and then we'll
Compound interest. Boom, boom, boom. We're going to be super rich.
Is money cheap? All right, let's go. All right. Any other threads of this before we hit a break and start to turn our attention more to football things and questions from the tailgate and the big old bag of mail?
Fight the power.
Hey, that's what they did in Europe. I don't. They took to the streets.
Well,
that was a 12-team Super League. So the one thing that is kind of similar to this, I've been watching the documentary. Is it Fever Pit? What's the thing? It's on Paramount. It's the creation of the Premier League, and it's pretty wild because it is a lot like some of these proposals and the pushback against it. And they were talking about the money that was going into it. It is pretty wild. I mean, I just think it's incredible how we have so much uncertainty in our sport that we cover. We've already seen more change in the last 3 years than I think we've seen in the last 50, like easily. And we might get just as much change in the next 5 to 10 years. And it's concerning. Like I think we all consider ourselves sort of guardians of the sport. You can tell from the chat, people are like, does anybody like this? No. But I think if you're going to start having to pay the players, which does feel like that's coming, you're going to have to evolve quickly. And that's why people are putting forth proposals like this. Like, how do we figure out that problem? Because that's a very real problem that they haven't had to worry about for 50, 75 years. You never had to pay the players. All of a sudden you are. That's why we're having these discussions, or else you just would have seen the NCAA and the schools just keep swimming in money. And we've been, hey, this is great. We love the passion of college football. Like, all this is inevitable. And like, I fought against a lot of that for a long time as if somebody who appreciated being a student athlete. And I still would if I thought it was a viable option. It's just not. So I've completely shifted my focus to what are the best options of how do we make the sport as great as we can. That's why I'm way more pro, it feels like minor league NFL, because that's what it's going to be. And how do we make it a good product as that evolves?
How do we keep as much of what we love and carry it into college football's future?
Yes.
And it's a tough balance. And while we have gotten our laughs in here to Len and the rest of the CST group, I don't mind no bad ideas brainstorming. And so maybe there will be some stuff from this that ends up being a part of college football's future. But I will say there are aspects to this, according to the reporting, that make me think it is more of a no bad ideas type brainstorming session at this point in the process. Coming up on the other side, ooh, spring games starting to get going. What are we keeping our eyes out for? Clemson, Auburn, NC State among the teams that will be hitting the field this spring. And your questions, our answers, next.
It's time for a little all-star college basketball.
It's the Reese's College All-Star Game, April 5th on CBS Sports Network.
Back here on the Cover 3 podcast this Saturday, April 6th. That's a few spring games, the 13th and the 20th, locked and loaded with some of the biggest programs in the country. So we're going to get into a little bit of a rhythm over the next couple of weeks, a little bit looking ahead and then a lot more coming out of it. So Tom, Clemson, Auburn, NC State, the field. What's an item or two that you at least are going to be looking for? I'm not expecting you to sit down and spend your Saturday taking in spring games, but obviously we circle back to be able to look for things that we can glean for our notebooks heading into the summer. What are you looking out for?
I'm hurt that you would even suggest that that's not how I plan on spending my weekend. I think of the spring
Buddy,
games.
you've got Valero sweats, all right? You're going to be up on Saturday.
Come on, Jordan Spieth. I need you to pull through for me this weekend. I think of the games this weekend, honestly, the ones that I'm most interested in, and again, I'm not really going to be watching, but I will be reading, Auburn, because I would like to see what that offense looks like if it takes a step forward. Again, my feelings on Peyton Thorne are very much known on this show. I'm not very high on him, but they have upgraded the receiver spot. So let's see how that looks. And let's see if there's any indication there that maybe Auburn will be active in the portal. And then at NC State, like Grayson McCall coming in, I want to see what it looks like. I want to see if, because last year he was a little banged up. I want to see if he's healthy. I want to see how he's going with that team. Because I do think NC State, it's a team that we they're in the Final Four in basketball. So Dave Dorn has to start worrying if they're a basketball school again. He needs to reestablish that this is a football school. And I think Grayson McCall is an interesting prospect to me because if he gets banged up, and I've seen him struggle a bit last year in a new offense without Jamie Chadwell, this is a huge season for him as far as his career, because there's a lot of questions I think are going to be answered, and they're not going to be answered this weekend, obviously, but it's one thing to keep an eye on, because that's an NC State team that dark horse wise, not likelihood, but very, very dark horse wise, that's the kind of program that in a 12-team playoff can compete for an at-large if things click. So, and I think if Grayson McCall lives up to the hype, or it lives up to his potential that we saw when he was at Coastal, that's a team that could be in the conversation for most of the season. So it's an important thing to watch for me.
Oh, I think it's a huge, no surprise, been doing a lot of NC State, podcasts and shows going on there, talking a little hoops. And then at the end, they're like, hey, let's talk a little about football. And so I'm like, sweet. And I'm totally on board with you, Tom. I think you have to, and it's kind of the same thing when we talked about Miami yesterday. Like it feels like this is the year where it really is wide open at the top, because for a long time, it's Clemson, damn, like pencil it in, just bam, right there. And then last year it was kind of Florida State. Bam, put them in there. This year, Clemson will probably be the favorite, but I don't think it's by much. I don't think it's a lot. And then there's a lot of question marks around the conference. And I do think there's several teams. And if you go by the track record, NC State has always been competitive. We know kind of trust their defense. I mean, they, to me, feel like a Utah. Now, they haven't had the success that Utah has had with multiple, conference championships, but they're always kind of good. And if they do get somebody special at quarterback, then it's like, oh, okay, this team could be a real threat. I mean, they beat Clemson last year, like that's the other one that's this weekend where Clemson, so many of these teams you watch spring games because you have to see the new faces, in new places. Clemson, you're getting not much transfer portal activity.
Yes.
So you don't, there's not that intrigue, but you do want to see Cade Klubnik, the evolution of him. How much more comfortable is he? And he has to take that next step forward for them as a quarterback. But I'd say NC State and Auburn are kind of the two teams that I'm, looking forward to see kind of what buzzworthy comes out from the weekend.
Yeah, there's just mystery to them. That you're right. Like there's no mystery to what Clemson's going to be.
I've got a list of oh no's. If I unfortunately, I think would like to see Clemson's defense overpower its offense, because I think that Clemson being awesome personnel wise, just looking at the players who they've got back and the way that things are lining up, they check boxes at every 3 levels on the defense. Meanwhile, offensive line and wide receiver, I'm kind of like, yeah, there's some guys out there. Like, let's see how it goes. If all of a sudden Clemson's out there pushing them around, that'd be bad. Like if the offense is pushing around the defense, that would be concerning. But who among these wide receivers appears to be in rhythm with Cade Klubnik? And I'm very wary because whether it's a Joe, whether it's Bo Collins, there have been Clemson wide receivers that have huge plays in the spring game, almost like they dial them up. And then you get into the fall, you get into the regular season, never really pays off. So I've got some scars there, but it doesn't change the fact that when I'm looking at Clemson's ceiling, I think it will be determined by the passing attack. Phil Maffa is back, and I really like Phil Maffa. And he's a hard, physical runner who I think can, be a good thing to build around for this offense. But like Briningstool and Maffa, like that is not a super dynamic offense unless they're able to add more to the passing game. Year 3, Cade Klubnik. Year 2 of Klubnik and Garrett Riley. I mean, we haven't mentioned Garrett Riley's name once. That's like the hottest.
Oh.
Dabo's changed his ways. He's going to unlock everything. So yeah, let's see how Clemson's offense looks. And if they look too good, am I concerned about my expectations in terms of the Tigers being one of the top defenses, not just in the ACC. I think the Tigers can have one of the top 10 defenses in the country.
Cade Klubnik legacy spring game. He doesn't play well. It's good.
He doesn't play well.
Oh my gosh. I'm looking back too, because it's been a minute since you've had an a Clemson receiver, like top 10 in ACC in receiving. You have to go all the way back to 2020, Amari Rodgers. Before that, it was T. Higgins. But like before that, it was T. Higgins. And you had every single year, there was like at least a guy that was like a threat.
From 11 to 19. Danny, I bet it was 8 years. And
it was like NFL talent, dudes that you were like, we got to defend them. And some of this, I'm sure, has to do with quarterback play as well. But maybe it's not. Maybe it is about the talent at wide receiver. So that's one thing I think is a big storyline to keep an eye on. Who emerges as that, and when I'm not talking nationally, I'm just talking in the ACC.
Right. I mean, even getting to that point is going to be something that should be a step forward. All right. What about Cam Coleman? We talked about the Auburn wide receiver. That's somebody to keep an eye on. Here's a question from the Cover 3 Tailgate. All right. If we want to talk about a super league, here's an interesting question. Is Missouri a better fit grouped in with the SEC, the Big 10, or the Big 12? Of course, the SEC is where Missouri is now. The Big 12 is where Missouri was. And the Big 10 has always been kind of a fan, like rumored, sort of fit there. Tom, I'll let you get first crack at this. You've got the geographical advantage. Where's Missouri a best fit for?
I think Missouri's 2 states in one. I think that if you go to like the St. Louis area in the northern part of the state, I would think it's more of a Big 10 feel. I think once you get to the southern part of Missouri, it is very much like an SEC kind of cultural program kind of fit. So I think they would be fine in both. I know that before, when they were still in the Big 12, I wanted, like when the Big 10 was expanding, Missouri was always a program I wanted the Big 10 to go after, because just like there's always been in basketball, there was the rivalry. At the time, there was a while where Illinois and Mizzou were playing football games every single year. So for like a rivalry, a selfish rivalry for me, I wanted Mizzou in the Big 10. I do think it fits better in the SEC and the Big 10 than the Big 12, ironically enough, seeing as how that's where it was. Especially, but I mean, I know they have the established rivalry with Kansas, the border war and all that stuff, but I just think culturally it always made more sense to me in the Big 10 or the SEC where it is
now. I think it's Big 12 and it's no brainer. Maybe that's me just kind of picturing the historical aspect of them going all the way back to the Big 8. I just think it feels more natural. Like if you went back, I think Pate did this where he went back and just said, all right, this is, if we went regional, this is where I'd put everybody. And he kind of went back 20, 30 years and kind of restructured college football. I think it'd be the Big 12.
Like that, like the Gary Pinkel building, like the early Gary Pinkel era, Who do we imagine him
Chase
playing?
Daniel,
Yeah, it's Big 12 schools. Yeah.
Yeah.
I could rock with that. I mentioned, let's see. All right, we've got Dave jumped in at 8:04 a.m. Eastern time because he's in the UK. So he was asking,
Probably in bed by now.
he was saying he's trying to come to the United States and do a Friday, Saturday, Sunday of football. So he would do Friday college, Saturday college, and then Sunday NFL. He said plane travel is not necessary. Like it could be a plane travel, but no, not ideal. Where should he set up shop to try to knock out a Friday, Saturday, Sunday? You could also do Friday high school too, if you wanted to do that.
I was thinking Texas, like somewhere in that.
Yeah,
so that does help the Friday night high school scene. I was gonna see. I don't think the SEC, like Texas, you want to pump the ACC, say SMU.
Yeah,
football,
Friday. Yeah, let's
night.
go Friday night ACC.
Because I do think like seeing the Cowboys, would be an incredible Sunday run. See them play some sort of NFC rival. I'm trying to think.
I think Texas is a good answer. I also think like in Atlanta would be a good answer because maybe on a Friday night you could see a Georgia Southern game or something. Like it's a drive, but it's not like an incredible.
You could see like high level Georgia high school football.
Another one, yeah.
Or Georgia high school football, and then on Saturday you go to a Georgia game, and then on Sunday you can go to the Falcons game. Like I just think that Atlanta is, it's the hub of the SEC for a reason. It's because it's reachable to a lot of different schools in the area. So. I think Atlanta would be good. I think, like you said, Danny, Dallas would be good. Houston would be good. I think any city like that would be great.
Atlanta's not a horrible drive to Auburn either. Like if you wanted to do, Saturday, then Falcons Sunday.
On the sneak, it's my preferred place to stay when I'm at Auburn.
For sure.
Stay in Atlanta and make life way easier for flying out on Sunday. And having to have that. He also, Dave said, thanks in advance. Love the show. They're going to get in the United Kingdom 3 games every Saturday night this season.
That's
which will
awesome.
Be epic. So we're excited that our friends across the pond get to share their love of college football. And then Stanley had the answer I love the best. You guys hinted at it. Go to the Houston area where you get Texas high school football in the Houston area. Saturday, you drive to College Station for Texas A&M. And then on Sunday, you go see the Houston Texans, who, especially in the wake of this week's trade news, are the hottest thing.
You could see CJ Stroud, MVP, 2024 season. You could see him on display.
Yeah, I really like that one. Houston area where you get the high school football. Then you could go to Texas A&M. Then you could also follow it up with the Texans. That would be a pretty excellent little way to run it through.
Or shout out Spencer Hall here. You could go to Alabama because he's always playing that game, Alabama or UK. Where he puts up a picture of somebody and it's impossible to tell the difference.
Yeah. All right, let's go one more and then we'll hit a break and go to the big old bag of mail. Noah from the Tailgate also jumped in early, 8:30 a.m. Eastern time. We appreciate you, Noah. If a power conference team needed a head coach but was only able to hire a former college head coach who is not coaching currently, who would be your first few calls, important parentheses qualifier, besides Nick Saban?
I'd call Dan Mullen.
Urban Meyer?
I'd probably call Mullen first. I know some people might be shocked by that. There's some baggage there with Urban.
Undoubtedly. I mean,
right. I mean, it's hard to get over the disaster that was Jacksonville. And I also do wonder, like, Saban got out because I don't think a lot of it, what he said was why he got out, the NIL era. But I also think the mentality of players now is different since Urban was back in college football. And I think he might struggle with today's mentality. I think the players are more thinking like the Jacksonville Jaguar players that were looking at him like, you want me to do what? Like, you got to explain why you're doing drills. And I don't think Urban's used to that. It's, hey, we're doing this my way and it's going to work. I think Mullen would adapt better.
Yeah, I'd agree. I also think it depends on what Power 5 school you are. Like, if I want to win national titles, then I'd probably go Urban Meyer. If I want to be good and just compete, winning 9 to 10 games a year, I'd probably go Mullen. If I wanted development, well, it would have been Bronco, but Bronco took the New Mexico job, so I don't know who I would go with that off the top of my head. But yeah, I think that depends. But I'm with you, Danny. I'd go Dan Mullen over Urban Meyer right now.
Do you know there's a coach that is out there that has a national championship as a head coach, that has another one as an assistant coach, that at one time was on almost everybody's list of top 5 coaches in college football? None of us have said Jimbo Fisher at the top of our tongues.
Oh,
I thought you was going to get the gumbo. Oh, boy, get the okra in there. The corners.
But isn't it wild, the roller coaster ride of emotions that college football is? I mean, Jimbo Fisher was on, Ogeron was not, but Jimbo was on almost everybody's, because we see them every time about this year, who are the top coaches in college football. Jimbo was always at least in the top 10, and most of the times in the top 5. He's available now, and we didn't say it. You know, I do wonder if he's got a lot of cash to sit on. You know, personally, I don't know if maybe he's had enough, but he's still pretty young. Like, I'm curious to see what it would take for Jimbo to get back in. And if he is in the news site, like, I don't know, is he going to broadcast this year? Is he going to do something to keep his name out there? And if he does, is he at the forefront of the next cycle? You know, I don't know. Right now, it doesn't feel like he's completely forgotten about, which I think is unfair to him somewhat.
You know what we need to get? We need to get like a Jimbo, Nick, Belichick, and Pete Carroll podcast. The 4 of them just getting on there talking ball. That's what we need to do. They should start a podcast.
Pete Carroll would be an interesting one. But I don't know if Surfer Pete's got one in there, but you mentioned development. And when I think of, like, if I want to have a smaller program that is all about teaching the game of football, I go ask Chris Peterson if he's interested. Because I feel like Chris Peterson is another.
And he'll say no, he's not.
But because Chris Peterson got out, for reasons that more or less seem similar to Nick Saban, or at least a cousin of Nick Saban, but it was 3 years before he did. You know, he was like, I don't like the way the football.
You read the tea leaves a lot sooner.
He's like, I just want to read. I just want to read books and, you know, think about teaching. He's so much of an educator out there, and money got too big, or the stakes got too big. He's
good on TV too.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Chief Brody and Ryan, a couple names. David Shaw, I think he'd be one I'd call. He feels more commissioner-ish. Like, he is so smart, impressive. Like, and I know we've tossed around Saban or Sankey or one of the guys that are already there, but if college football was in the market for a commissioner, I think David Shaw would be an outstanding recommendation. But if he was interested in coaching, I would definitely call him too. Yeah, that's a great call. We're mentioning all these former Pac-12 coaches. Pac-12 dies, and now the coaches just become these long lost figures of the college football past.
I do think it would be interesting to see David Shaw at a program in this current environment that doesn't have the limitations that Stanford has based on what you can do with your roster. Because I don't think he's a bad football coach. I just think that he got like into a situation where he was playing with one arm tied behind his back for a few years there. And he won early. Like, he did win when he took over. And then, he didn't just forget.
Right. You can trace it to the early signing period. Stanford's admission process and the early signing period.
And we just saw last year, because like David Shaw's style of play, it's no different than what Michigan did. You can win a national title doing it still.
I got one for you. Pat Fitzgerald. Has enough time passed? And if he wins that lawsuit, by the way, I don't know if you guys saw it. It was just on the homepage that lawsuit is still going forward. Like, Northwestern wanted to throw it out, and the judge was like, no, we're going to hear this. I think he's a great coach. And clearly you'd have to do some due diligence and make sure, you had done your research, but I think he's a great coach.
I've done my own research. That's how you be an independent thinker. You do your own research and you hire
D'Antonio. D'Antonio's been a name. How old is he?
Is
he close to 70?
I don't know if he's 70 yet, but here, let me look.
Because some of these, like with Pete Carroll, you start wondering about age.
Right.
He's 68, so he's getting there.
Yeah. Better hire him quick.
Yeah. And Pete Carroll might be old, but Pete Carroll's like 45 in person. You know what I mean?
Yes.
He's got 28-year-old energy for the most part.
And no matter what happens, you're only going to get a couple years. You're going to get a couple good ones. Just ask everybody in Chapel Hill. All right. Coming up on the other side, lots of different ways to approach a quarterback room. So what do you think about the way that Oklahoma and Texas are going about it. We'll explain next.
You came down here to tell us that your date is missing.
I did not get ghosted. I think he was taken.
You were dating as a way to face your divorce.
Was I really the only thing holding you together, D?
Damn.
Ready or not,
I am in search of a man with whom I had a beautiful connection.
you can't hide.
If anything feels off, we'll go. Off. Murderer.
Who are you?
Diara.
Gonna find you.
Back here on the Cover 3 podcast, where if you go and you leave us a 5-star review, and in that review, you put a mailbag question in there, we'll tackle it. The big old bag of mail. This first question comes from username Just Want Football. Subject: Best Young Quarterback Gamble. Mailbag question: what are your thoughts on the different gambles Oklahoma and Texas appear to be taking regarding handling incumbent vet quarterbacks versus their young quarterback talent? For example, in 2023, Dillon Gabriel ranked number 4 in QBR, 9.5 yards per attempt, but in 2024, he seems to have been forced to transfer because Oklahoma is betting on the potential of Jackson Arnold over the next 2 to 3 seasons. On the other hand, in 2023, Quinn Ewers ranked number 15 in QBR. He had 8.8 yards per attempt, and he's sticking around for another year. If Ewers starts this year, it's a safe bet that Texas will have a number 15 or better quarterback, but Arch Manning's ceiling seems higher, and they're at risk of having only 1 year of Arch as a starter. Which strategy, whether it's Oklahoma's going with the young guy early or Texas's sticking with their vet now, which strategy does the Cover 3 team think is smarter?
I don't know if I would call one smarter than the other. I think it's situation dependent. Like I think Dillon Gabriel, I don't know whether you want to say he was told to leave or he chose to leave on his own, blah, 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 pushed out. Like, to me, that's just a testament to their belief in Jackson Arnold and what they think they can do with him now that they're moving to the SEC. With Texas, I think Arch Manning has been kind of clear. Like, this whole camp has been clear from the start. He doesn't want to start right away. He wants to develop and learn and ease himself into the role. And I think with Quinn Ewers, I mean, you just got to the playoff with Quinn Ewers last year. I don't think you're going to bench for that. Now, I have talked. I wouldn't be shocked. I don't think Quinn Ewers is incredible. I wouldn't be shocked at all if he struggles or gets hurt and Arch Manning steps into a bigger role this year. But I don't know. I mean, I think it really just depends on how you feel about your quarterback room. I don't think there is a set strategy. I think it could have been either way. If they didn't think Jackson Arnold was ready, Dillon Gabriel's still Oklahoma's quarterback this year. They clearly think Jackson Arnold is ready and want to get forward with it. And maybe Texas doesn't need to push Arch because they have Quinn Ewers.
I think one approach is way riskier.
Right. Because you're one hit away from like everything changing. And one of these has a former number 1 quarterback, 5-star prospect as your backup.
Right. Also, you know who led the Big 12 in passing? It was Dillon Gabriel. Like I was surprised. I was looking it up. I was like, was he 3rd or 4th? He was more passing yards, better touchdown interception than Quinn Ewers, who we're talking about. This to me feels like the type of gamble that Andy Reid took when he traded Alex Smith away. Because Alex Smith was pretty good. They were a playoff team and they'd win, and it's kind of different because Alex Smith wasn't putting up stats like Dillon. But I think this is a risky play. But I also think you mentioned like what happens if you get hurt. If you stuck with Dillon Gabriel, you might have lost Jackson Arnold. In the world we live in today, he might have been like, I'm not waiting. I want to go pay. I want to get paid. I want to go play. So it's different. But I do think it's way riskier. Like if Dillon Gabriel's at Oregon tearing it up and they're in the playoff hunt and winning the Big Ten, and Oklahoma in the SEC is struggling with Jackson Arnold and they're 8-4, there are going to be some Oklahoma fans that be like, why did we let go of Dillon Gabriel? So that one's way more risky. And maybe some of that is dictated by exactly what we're talking about. Maybe they were like, hey, we got to make our choice. Let's bet on the future. And we've seen him in practice and he looks great. And trust me, like talking to Dusty about Jackson Arnold, the dude's a stud. Like they love him. They see incredible upside to where I think Dillon Gabriel was more system QB, even though he made some great plays. I mean, he made some really good plays. The game-winning touchdown against Texas was phenomenal, and he made some big plays. But I think they see more upside and they're willing to take that risk. But I do think it is risky. If it was me, I would have probably done my best to keep him around, but I don't even know if that was an option.
Well, point of order, Dylan Gabriel led the Big 12 in yards per game, but if you want to go passing efficiency, it was actually Jason Bean, who was the #1 quarterback in the Big 12 last year. But I will say, going back to passing efficiency, fun fact about Oklahoma, from 2015 to 2021, 7 seasons, the leader in Big 12 passing efficiency was an Oklahoma quarterback. In those 7 seasons, it was 5 different quarterbacks. I know that was Lincoln Riley, and this is a new coaching staff, but I feel like with Oklahoma, I'm willing to give them the benefit of the doubt in that they know what they have at the position, and whether it's Dylan Gabriel or Jackson Arnold, they're probably going to be okay. And I think that, like Chip, you mentioned the risk as far as injury. I think Texas is somewhat of a black swan in this, in that if Quinn Ewers gets injured, you do have the 5-star behind him. But if you look around the country, how many of these playoff contenders can you look at and honestly say if their starter goes down, they'll be just fine?
I don't know about just fine, but Oregon came to mind, the place where Dylan Gabriel lands, because now they also have Dante Moore as a backup.
Dante Moore, who did what last year at UCLA? He struggled.
Yeah, I mean,
he went to Oregon explicitly saying he wanted to go somewhere where he could learn for another year.
We don't know Texas will be fine with Arch Manning.
We don't.
Right.
That's he wasn't great in the spring game. Like everybody's like, so I do think, because I think Texas is in a similar situation that Oregon is with a 5-star recruit that was okay. Ohio State's in a similar situation. They got multiple 5-stars behind Will Howard, so we think they'll be okay. Georgia is going to have somebody behind Carson Beck that I'm sure is really talented. We think, but like you never know until you're in that position. We thought Texas last year was going to be Malik Murphy's show when Quinn Ewers went down, and he struggled. So I don't know. I think it's one of those ones where it does appear that they'll be fine. But even though his last name is Manning, there's always the chance that there is a drop-off.
There's also the context of Jeff Lebby, Oklahoma's offensive coordinator last year, who was also with Dylan Gabriel at UCF. He leaves the Oklahoma staff to take the Mississippi State head coaching job. And even though they're promoting Seth Luttrell to maintain a stylistic consistency, the personal side of that also might have been a factor as well.
I will also say, too, like with Dylan Gabriel, Danny, you touched on it, as far as like the system-ish quarterback perspective. Like there are certain things Dylan Gabriel can do and he does very well, but there are also things he can't.
Right.
And maybe they feel like with Jackson Arnold, he doesn't have the experience. He doesn't have the, the certainty, but they just feel like maybe they can open up their playbook a lot more with Jackson Arnold than they could with Dylan.
Totally. And that's definitely the case.
All right, let's go back to the big old bag of mail. This question comes from ZD Big. Hey guys, love the show. Can't wait for summer school to get started back up soon.
Bud's got to fix his mic first.
Me too. I can't wait till summer school. Then Bud does all the work. Let's go.
We've got a week of summer schools this week.
Oh man. Damn.
Oh man. All the coaching carousel moves this year has me thinking, in your opinions, who are the most and least patient programs when it comes to deciding to fire a coach? Thanks. Appreciate all the content you guys put out.
I mean, there's a list of school. There's like a list because I think they're all impatient. I think the more unique list would be who are the more patient fan bases. Yeah. It's like you can name any school that we would consider a top 25 program.
Oh, with any high expectations, they are impatient.
They're all impatient. Yeah. But I think the more thing is like, is there a team that's on the cusp or possibly in there that is more patient than another one? I don't know.
So, like you look at like athletic directors change. Like the people who are making these decisions it's not usually more than 2 coaches that an athletic director gets. And if they both fail, that athletic director is either being replaced, or if he hit one that hit, he's being hired somewhere else. So,
and also the buyout money has changed. Like in 10 years ago, when we're covering the coaching carousel, you only had a handful of jobs where you were concerned about the buyout. And now in the modern day, I understand when the buyout drops at UCLA, which is not a top 20 program. Like it is the money has gotten so big that that's an influence where fans can be impatient, but doesn't necessarily mean a change is going to happen along the way.
You mentioned UCLA. They might be a great example. They were so patient that they waited so long. Their coach actually left them to take a coordinator job.
Yeah, like in the comments, Iowa's mentioned it because it's like the opposite end where they're the most patient. But there are situations like that. Is that patience, or is that just a situation where the athletic director is not really the person in charge because the coach is so entrenched that they have the most power in that department? And now we're kind of even seeing the winds of change in the Iowa athletic department, in that, Brian Ferentz was basically, he had to fire him last year, and maybe, you don't know what his future is going to be there. So yeah, it's dependent on school. I think you're right, Danny. I think the more interesting question is, who are the most patient fan bases? And the answer is none. Any fan base that cares about their football program is impatient.
Don't you think Kentucky is a program? I don't know if patient's the right word, but content maybe, in realizing they have somebody good for them. And they're like, yeah, well, the dude was going to take the A&M job, and they welcomed him back with open arms, right? I mean, that was announced. So I think they're pretty patient. I don't know if it's the right word though.
Cal is patient.
Yeah. Do they even care?
Yeah, but I mean,
they're indifferent. They're not patient. They're just indifferent. Oh, we have football this season?
I'm trying to think.
Football games are great protest areas.
I haven't. All right, let's try to think about this. Has DJ Durkin obviously removed amid scandal? Has a Maryland head coach been run out of town? Like with Randy Edsall, it just kind of soured.
Yeah, I wouldn't say Randy was run out of town. I would think that towards the end of Friedgen's era, there was some.
Well, the James Franklin was in waiting. Remember, that was kind of pressuring him.
And like some fans were kind of sour about Franklin leaving for the Vanderbilt job because they thought that Friedgen should have been pushed out and let Franklin take over there. So, of course, Franklin's success immediately at Vanderbilt really helped with that situation about those feelings. But no, I don't think anybody I could say at Maryland's been run out of town.
Arkansas came to mind for impatient.
Yeah.
I mean, I understand that like Sam Pittman is like still here after kind of, being in the discussion of the hot seat at the end of last year. And we'll see how things go for the Razorbacks in the upcoming 2024 season. But Chad Morris didn't even have time to set up real estate, and I understand it very much looks like Chad Morris was over his head. And like, maybe you do in the modern era benefit from being able to just get out right away. But the Willie Taggart at Florida State and Chad Morris at Arkansas were hired in the same cycle. They were fired in the same cycle, and neither one finished year 2. That to me is very quick.
Nick Snyder in the chat brings up Miami as an impatient fan base. I think there's definitely merit to that. Like, if you don't show up and just restore the U to glory right away, it's like, well, we got to move on from this guy.
Minnesota patient?
Yes, but I mean, it's weird because the situations are changing so drastically, no different than the sport itself. Like, the expectations are changing at Minnesota because for a long time, Minnesota football was just, try to get to a bowl game. And then Jerry Kill showed up and had success there. And PJ Fleck has kind of continued that success and raised the bar a little bit. So it's always one of those situations where once a fan base gets a taste of like that 10-win season, they kind of start wanting it more. And then when it doesn't come, they start getting impatient. So it's like you look at Minnesota last year, it was a down year compared to where things have been with Fleck. And immediately you hear rumblings from Minnesota fans like maybe it's time to move on. So yeah, I don't think they're that much different than anybody now.
Ryan, our friend from the Tailgate, patient and content could be different. I think that's fair, and that being able to say like, we are content. Patience, he was arguing, implies that you are expecting something to hit a level up at some point.
I'm noticing a trend here. The teams that I feel like have a lot of content fan bases, there are a lot of them in the ACC. And Grant pointed out the Cal is an ACC team now too. I'm thinking Wake Forest. Like Wake Forest, there aren't many quick like firings in the history of their program. Like they've stuck with guys and left, let them coach and see if they could figure their way out. They've been very faithful. Let's look at it that way.
Hey!
They're faithful.
You know who
they're good. These are what should be good fan bases, right? They support their coach no matter what.
correlation isn't necessarily causation, but I feel like the most patient schools are the basketball schools. But then you flip it around, and the basketball schools are very impatient with their basketball coaches, but might be more patient with their football coach. You know,
it's because the one read of the situation at a basketball school is that football just kind of warms you up for the athletic experience, gets you ready, gets you going. Because when's Midnight Madness? It's in like mid-October.
Yeah.
So it's like, give us a couple of good, like outdoor, social events, cocktail parties, if you will. And then November starts, we'll start filling up the arena and start getting our attention towards Jerry Palm's bracketology. Yeah. That's one read of a situation from a basketball school. All right, let's see. See, we got any more in here? I think we got that. I think we're good. Anything else?
I don't think so.
No.
Right.
Oh, somebody did say, I can't believe none of you guys brought up Bob Stoops. I think he'd be a great hire. But I don't know if he wants to. I think he's like at a point of his life where he's like, I'm good. Coach a little XFL for fun where the time restraints aren't too bad. I think he'd be a great option if he'd consider it. But I don't know. I think that's probably why we didn't bring him up.
Tequila magnate. He doesn't coach anymore.
I was going to say like that is perhaps the like life path that I am of all college football coaches that I've been around, interacted with, and covered. The Bob Stoops, top coordinator, national championship early in your head coaching tenure, which kind of gives you bona fides. Yep. You just roll off conference championships. You step out early and then become a tequila salesman, a very successful one at that. And every time I see him, he looks happy.
He looks happy as hell, dude. He is relaxed. He's got like 3 buttons undone every time you see him. He does not have a care in the world.
Some print on the button down with maybe a collar that's a different tone than the shirt. Right. I mean, he is loving it. Bob Stoops, he's doing it right. We will be back on Monday where we'll talk about some of our thoughts from the weekend at Auburn, Clemson, NC State, and others. Next week, also, we'll start to get things warmed up because in 11 days from right now, 11 days, the transfer portal is back open for business. So we'll, of course, be keeping our eye on all of that. And you can follow him on Twitter at Tom Friedel. You can follow him at Danny Cannell. You can follow me at Chip_Patterson. Gentlemen, thank you very much.
Thank you.